They gave me the assignment the way they give you an assignment nobody wants. Quietly, without eye contact, with a form already signed. Escort detail for the cool Empress designate. Varenthus of the third succession. 1 human military attaché duration, the length of the Accord Tribunal. Which, depending on how the vote fell, was either 2 standard hours or the rest of her life. The officer who handed me the folder said, "Don't make it worse." He didn't say what worse meant. I didn't ask. I met her in the transit corridor outside the Accord chamber. She was alone. Her full diplomatic retinue had filed petitions for reassignment the moment the tribunal was announced, and every one of those petitions had been approved within the hour. I had read that in the briefing notes without comment. Someone had approved 47 reassignment requests in 60 minutes. Someone very much wanted her standing in that chamber without witnesses. She was taller than I expected. Cool build, long-limbed, gray-scaled along the jaw and the backs of her hands. Eyes the deep amber green of something very old and very patient. She wore the formal white of her house, unadorned. The insignia strips that should have run along both sleeves had been removed, leaving the pale seams where they'd sat. They'd taken her rank markers before the hearing even opened, told me everything about how this was going to go. She looked at me the way people look at someone they're trying not to pity. "You're the attaché," she said. Her voice carried no inflection. Not coldness, more like someone who had been bracing for a long time and had stopped wasting energy on anything decorative. "Yes, ma'am." "You're aware of the petition count?" "I am." She held my eyes for a moment. Then she said, "You can still file." "I know," I said. "I'm not going to." She didn't thank me. I didn't want her to. She just gave me one small nod, the kind that says "I hear you," not "I believe you yet," and turned toward the chamber door. I fell into step beside her. The Galactic Accord Chamber is built to make you feel small. That is not an accident. It is the architecture of institutional will, and the Accord has had 800 years to perfect it. The ceiling vaults 4 stories above the floor. The deliberation tiers rise in rings around a central dais, each level occupied by representative bodies in their formal colors, and every face in every tier was already turned down toward the dais when we entered. Toward her, presiding arbiter was a Veth counselor named Orvan, old enough to have seen the cool succession contested twice before, and patient enough to have outlasted both contests. He watched us cross the floor the way you watch something you've already decided about. "Varenthus," he said. "Not Empress designate, not ma'am, just the name alone. The tribunal has convened to examine the legitimacy claim of the third succession in light of the erasure doctrine findings submitted by the Halvek Coalition." He paused. "You have been granted standing to respond." She stood at the dais and did not flinch. "I understand. You are unrepresented," he noted, and there was something in the phrasing, something just slightly too satisfied, that I felt in my back teeth. "She has a representative," I said. Tyr went quiet. Not the polite quiet of parliamentary procedure, the other kind. Orvan looked at me. He took his time doing it. "You are the human attaché. I am. Your role is escort and observation. You have no standing to represent before this body." "I have standing to speak on behalf of the Terran Accord mission," I said, "which has not withdrawn its support for the cool Empress designate. Petition count remains at 0. That was true. Also, it was only true because I was the entire Terran Accord mission, and I had not filed, and there was no one else to file on our behalf. But it was true. Someone on the third tier murmured something I couldn't hear. Orvan held my gaze for a long moment, then looked back to Varenthus. He moved on. He'd note the human statement in the record and deal with its implications later. That was the calculus I saw in his face. Later was fine. Later meant she had today. The hearing ran for an hour and 40 minutes. The erasure doctrine, as the Halvek Coalition presented it, clean and simple and thorough. The third succession had no legal standing because the bloodline documentation from the first succession interval been destroyed in the cool archive collapse of 83 years prior. No documentation, no verified lineage. No verified lineage. No Empress designate. No Empress designate, and the title reverted to the Halvek Coalition's candidate by treaty default. Varenthus stood through all of it without moving. She answered every question in the same level voice. Not defeated, not performing dignity, just actually composed, the way you are, when you've been carrying something for a long time, and you know the weight of it exactly. She cited the oral succession records, the witness testimonies, the secondary archive fragments that had survived the collapse. Every time she cited them, the Halvek representative produced a counter-citation, a procedural challenge, a documentation standard her evidence didn't technically meet. It was careful, deliberate, and it had been planned long before today. I watched the tears, watched which faces were impassive, which were satisfied, which were the specific careful neutral of people who have already made up their minds and are waiting for the clock to run out. I counted them. There were a lot of that last kind. The arbiter called for the preliminary position vote an hour in. 22 bodies were represented. Of those, 3 abstained. 16 voted to uphold the erasure doctrine challenge. 3 voted against. She stood and heard it and did not move. I stepped up beside her, close enough that the distance between us was no longer escort distance but something else, something that was visible from the tears. Orvan noted it. Attaché, you are not to position yourself at the dais. I'm not at the dais, I said. Beside her. It is the same position. It's a different meaning, I said. The chamber was very quiet. Varenthis turned her head and looked at me. Not a long look. Just a moment, the amber green of her eyes finding mine. Couldn't read everything in it. I could read the part that said she had not expected this. I hadn't planned it. I was a human military attaché with no legal standing and no political weight, in a chamber where the vote had already gone 16-3, and what I was doing was standing next to a woman they were trying to erase and refusing to move. That was all. It was not in the formal record, very much, but it was visible, and the chamber was watching. Orvan looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the tears. Then he said, "Precision I recognized as a man choosing his battles. The tribunal will recess for consultation. 40 standard minutes." He had not called an immediate ruling. He had called a recess. I felt Varenthis let out a breath, small and controlled beside me. The recess ran long, 62 minutes. When Orvan returned to his seat, the third-tier bloc that had abstained was now in quiet conference with 2 of the Halvek Coalition's junior representatives. I had watched that through the corridor window during the recess, and I did not think it was a coincidence. The final ruling, when it came, was procedural. The erasure doctrine challenge was found insufficient to constitute full legitimacy erasure on the basis of a single-session vote. Secondary documentation review would be required under a full archival process. Duration, open. It was not a victory. It was a stay. The challenge would come back, better prepared, with more coalition votes locked in advance, and the archival process would be shaped to arrive at the same answer with cleaner paperwork. We had not won anything permanent. She was still the Empress Designate tonight. The title had not been taken today. We walked out of the chamber the way we'd walked in, together, her slightly ahead, me a half step to her right. The corridor outside was empty. The retinue that had filed their reassignment petitions was not there to meet her. She stopped after 20 paces and stood still for a moment. I stopped with her. "It will come back," she said. "I know. You understand what you've recorded yourself as doing in that chamber." "I do." She turned to look at me, the formal white of her house, the empty seams where the rank markers had been. Those patient, old light eyes. "Why?" she said. It was a real question, not rhetorical. She wanted the actual answer. I thought about how to say it. I said, "Because someone should have." She held my eyes for a long moment. Then she looked away down the corridor toward the accommodation block and whatever work came next. "With me," she said. I did.